Hello everybody, this is Sir Jet and welcome to another episode of the Rizal Lectures. Today I am here in Los Baños, Laguna. Behind me is the cloud-covered Mount Makiling. And over there, very near here, is Dampalit Falls. Do you know that Dampalit Falls was mentioned twice by Rizal in his writings? He mentioned it when he was in the United States of America. He compared its beauty to the Niagara Falls. Rizal said that the Dampalit Falls is more beautiful than the Niagara. And another mention was, Rizal said that it was in Dampalit Falls where he saw his first crush, a girl named Julia, doing her laundry by the falls. Today we will talk about the love life of Dr. Jose Rizal. Are you ready for this episode? Let's go! Aside from being a doctor and a writer, many people would jokingly say that Rizal was also an international playboy. Well, it's up to you to judge after watching this episode. According to experts, there were at least 9 women linked to Rizal. When we say at least, that means there could be more. This list of 9 women were based on Rizal's writings and the accounts of family and friends of Rizal. Let's discuss their stories one by one. First, let's talk about Julia. She is not on the list because Rizal and Julia didn't have a formal relationship. Rizal just wrote in his diary that he had his first crush on a girl before he became a teenager. Rizal said that he saw a beautiful girl doing her laundry at the Dampalit waterfalls in Los Baños, Laguna. Rizal was there because he was accompanying his mother and sisters who also did their laundry at that place. Rizal just mentioned the first name of his first crush, Julia, but he didn't know the family name or the surname of his first crush. We don't have a photograph of Julia. What we have only is a painting, an artist's concept of how Julia looked like while doing her laundry in Los Baños, Laguna. Rizal's first serious relationship was with Segunda Katigbak. We have here a very old and faded image of Segunda. Rizal wrote in his diary that Segunda was rather short, with eyes that were eloquent and ardent at times and languid at others, rosy-cheeked with an enchanting, provocative smile that revealed her very beautiful teeth and the air of a sylph. Her entire self diffused a mysterious charm. Very flowery words from Rizal. Rizal said that he fell in love with Segunda at first sight. Segunda was born in 1863 in Lipa, Batangas to Norberto Calao Katigbak and Justa Solis. Unfortunately, during those times, arranged marriages were very common. Segunda was set to be married to Manuel Luz, a townmate in Lipa, Batangas. So right at the very start, they knew that their relationship was doomed because of this arranged marriage. Rizal was 16 years old at that time and Segunda was 14 years old. She was studying high school at La Concordia College. She was a classmate of Rizal's sister, Olympia. That's how they first met, through Rizal's sister, Olympia. The Katigbaks were a very rich family. They own a coffee plantation in Batangas. What were the sweet moments of Rizal and Segunda? Rizal gave her a pencil sketch of her portrait because Rizal was good in drawing. And in return, Segunda gave him paper roses. But the paper roses had a meaning. Paper roses were not true roses and they would just end up as decoration. And probably that's the meaning. Segunda must be saying to Rizal, our relationship will go nowhere because of my arranged marriage. And so Rizal wrote in his diary 3 years later his emotion upon breaking up with Segunda. Rizal wrote, ended at an early hour, my first love, my virgin heart will always mourn the reckless step it took on the flower-decked abyss. My illusion will return, yes, but indifferent, uncertain, ready for the first betrayal on the path of love. Very deep, very poetic. In simple language, he said he's just sad because of the breakup. Now, next on the list is Leonor Valenzuela. She's a girl from Pagsanhan, Laguna, and she's said to be Rizal's secret love. Here is an image of Leonor Valenzuela, and Rizal described her as a tall girl from Pagsanhan, and she is fondly called Orang. Her nickname is Orang. Maybe it comes from Leonora. Sounds like Leonorang. She's from a well-to-do family as her father is a barangay captain, Kapitan Juan, and her mother is also into politics. She is called Kapitana Sanday Valenzuela. They were very popular and strong families in Laguna. How did they first meet? Orang was a neighbor in Intramuros. Remember, Rizal was studying in UST. Since he was from Calamba, he needed a boarding house. This was when Rizal was a sophomore student at the University of Santo Tomas. And Rizal would frequently visit Orang's house with or without social gatherings. You know, in the old times, men would only visit the girl's house only when there was a party. So if you are a frequent visitor, that means you two are very close. Now we gave the title Secret Love to Orang because Rizal sent her secret love notes written in invisible ink. Now how do you make invisible ink? You just mix water and salt and then you use that as an ink. You dip the pen on that solution and you write on the white paper. When the solution dries, you put the paper beside a candle and you can see the letters. Without the candle, it's just plain white paper. And that's how this couple communicated. Now, why would Rizal write secret love letters to Orang? Why wasn't he bold enough to make the relationship known to everybody? Because there was a love triangle. Aside from Orang, Rizal had another girlfriend at the same time. Her name is Leonor Rivera. So there were two Leonors in Rizal's life at this time in his life. And these two Leonors know each other. They were neighbors. So in order for the other Leonor not to be suspicious, Rizal would write secret love letters. Now, the triangle was discovered when Rizal was already in Europe. A friend of Rizal named Jose Cecilio, nicknamed Chengoy, wrote to Rizal saying the two Leonors discovered that they had a common denominator, and it's him, Jose Rizal. And the two probably had a quarrel or a big fight upon discovering that their boyfriend is the same man. Now, back home, Orang didn't feel much sorrow upon Rizal's departure or with the breakup. She was said to have accepted suitors and attended social parties to meet new guys and ended up marrying an employee of a trade house. During that time, if you are an employee, you're somebody rich. Ordinary people would be farmers or laborers. But if you are an employee, that means you are somebody. So, Orang lived happily ever after. Now, let's talk about the other Leonor, Leonor Rivera. And she is said to be Rizal's true love. Why? Because they had an 11-year relationship. That's pretty long. This is how Leonor Rivera looked like. This is a photograph. This is how the real person looked like. Leonor Rivera is a native of Camiling, Tarlac. So, she's an Ilocana. Her nickname is Taimis. I don't know what that means. Maybe Tamis? Maybe she's a sweet lover? The Rivera family was mega rich. They had houses everywhere. They had a house in Dagupan, a house in Camiling, Tarlac, and a house in Intramuros. Their house in Dagupan was the finish line of the railroad that stretched from Tutuban to Pangasinan. And she is said to be a distant cousin of Rizal. How did they first meet? Both were studying in Manila, and Rizal was their boarder. When Rizal was studying in UST, he stayed in the house of Leonor's father. Being a distant relative, it's just natural for him to stay in the house of the Riveras. Now, as I have mentioned a while ago, they were sweethearts for 11 years. And experts say that that relationship with Leonor Rivera kept Rizal away from falling in love with the other women in Europe. Rizal had several European girlfriends after the breakup with Leonor. But during the time that they were together in a relationship, Rizal didn't have girlfriends in Europe. Now, unfortunately, Leonor's mother didn't like Rizal because he was known as a filibustero or a troublemaker, somebody who was against the Spanish authorities, against the Catholic priests. So, Leonor's mother was allergic of Rizal. He didn't want their family to be associated with Rizal, or she didn't want to be the mother-in-law of the enemy of the Spaniards. So she did everything to stop the relationship between her daughter and Rizal. The name of Leonor Rivera's mother is Silvestra Bauson. She's a native of Pangasinan. And how did she successfully stop the relationship of Rizal and her daughter? She talked with the postmaster or the boss at the post office in Manila and probably bribed the man. She said that all the letters of Rizal from Europe that is addressed to my daughter, don't give it to my daughter. Don't deliver it to our house. Just keep it here in the post office. And all the letters of my daughter addressed to Rizal, don't send them to Europe. And so for the next many years, Rizal didn't receive any communication from Leonor and vice versa. So the two lovers thought that probably the other person has forgotten. So Rizal must have thought that Leonor has forgotten him, and Leonor thought the same. Maybe Rizal has found another girlfriend in Europe, that's why he's not writing to me anymore. And wait, there's more. Tia Beyang, or the mother of Leonor, pushed her daughter to marry engineer Henry Keeping. This guy is an English engineer who supervised the construction of the Manila-Dagupan Railroad project. Remember, the finish line of the railway was very near their house in Pangasinan? So Silvestra Bauson must have seen this English engineer, and she said to her daughter, you just married this man because Rizal has forgotten you. See, he's not writing to you anymore. So might as well find another boyfriend. And here's a very handsome man from England, very rich also. And so in 1890, Leonor got married to Keeping. But Leonor still has Rizal in her heart. So before the wedding, she laid out her conditions to her mom. She said that number one, during the wedding, I will be standing beside you, not beside Henry Keeping. That's quite weird, you know? And then she said that I will never sing again. She must have great musical talent, and that she will never play the piano again, and that she would wear black all the days of her life. And so they got married with this condition. While in Europe, Rizal was still thinking of Leonor. She was always in his heart. And in fact, Rizal put her character in his famous novel Noli Me Tangere. The Maria Clara in Rizal's novel is actually Leonor Rivera. He based the character, the physical appearance of Maria Clara on the real Leonor Rivera. Years later, Rizal found out that Leonor got married, and so he was devastated. He was so sad. And at the same time, Leonor, upon discovering that her mother hid all the letters for many years, she was also very, very sad. But they cannot do anything anymore because she was already married to Henry Keeping. They had the first child, Carlos Rivera Keeping, who later married Lourdes Romulo, a sister of the Filipino diplomat Carlos P. Romulo. And the Romulo family is still very, very active in Philippine politics up to today. And they traced their root or their connection to Leonor Rivera. Leonor died giving birth to her second son. She was very young when she died in 1893. And Rizal was in Dapitan at the time of her death. So when Rizal heard the news that Leonor died, he was even so devastated once again. Now, number 4 on our list is Consuelo Ortega. And we call her the crush ng bayan. She was a Spaniard. Rizal met her when he was in Spain. Consuelo was the daughter of Don Pablo Ortega, a former mayor of Manila, a Spaniard assigned to work in the Philippines. And after his tour of duty, he went back to Spain and he continued to have good relationships with Filipinos going to Spain. His house was always open for parties. He was very hospitable to Filipino students studying in Spain. And he had a daughter, a very beautiful daughter named Consuelo. And in one of the parties, Rizal met her. Rizal wrote a poem for Consuelo. The title of the poem is A la Señorita C.O.E.R. And C.O.E.R. means Consuelo Ortega y Rey, the full name of Consuelo. And this is one of the best poems of Rizal. However, there were many other Filipinos who were in love with Consuelo. She must be very, very beautiful. That's why she's called Crush ng Bayan. Maximino and Antonio Paterno were also admirers of Consuelo. But of all the men who were roaming around Consuelo, her heart fell for Rizal. She must have been impressed by Rizal's poem writing abilities. And she would often ask Rizal to compose romantic verses or romantic poems for her. You know, in the 1800s, that's what lovers do. The girl would ask the guy for poems, and the guy would think of original poems and recite it to her. But suddenly, Rizal backed out of the relationship. There are two probable reasons why. Number one, he wanted to remain loyal to Leonor Rivera. He would always remember that he has a girlfriend back home in the Philippines, and he should not be courting other women in Europe. And another reason is that one of Rizal's friend was madly in love with Consuelo. His name is Eduardo Delete, and this is how he looked like. Eduardo Delete can also be found in history books because he's the one who suggested to Rizal to write a novel about the Philippines, about their advocacies. And he even volunteered to be Rizal's partner. They would write a novel together with him as co-author. So Rizal started the project, and we know that that's the Noli, but Eduardo Delete ended up not contributing anything. So he's just good in suggesting, but he is not a man of action. And many say that he prefers writing to women rather than writing about the country. And according to Rizal, Delete just wasted his time flirting and gambling instead of doing something for the country. We find an excerpt from Consuelo's diary about her last meeting with Rizal. She wrote, "Last night many came to bid us farewell. Rizal was the first to arrive. I had on a mourning cape that I made out of the cloth that Rizal had given me as a present. I made a grand impression. I showed it to him, saying, 'So you see, I fulfilled my promise. I'm dressed like a doll.' Rizal gave her a gift, and Consuelo wore that gift during the party. But sadly, Rizal didn't pursue the relationship anymore. He distanced himself, and Consuelo and Delete got engaged, but she lived a miserable life." Delete, in his diary, wrote about Consuelo. He said that she lost her humor. "Our marriage did not push through. She saw all her love affairs crumble and all her illusions dry up. She was very unfortunate, dying alone, sad and abandoned. A victim of tuberculosis, may she rest in peace." So Consuelo de Ortega, after the breakup with Rizal, had a miserable life. She didn't live happily ever after. Number 5 on our list is Osei-san. She is from Japan, and she was Rizal's tour guide when Rizal stayed in her country. Her real name is Seiko Usui, and her nickname is Osei-san. She's the daughter of a samurai. Now, a samurai is like a knight, so she is from a very rich and influential family, and Rizal was her first love. Many say that Rizal could have married her, and they could have lived happily ever after in Japan, because Rizal had a stable job when he was in Japan. He was working in the Spanish embassy, and then she is from a wealthy family. They could have easily settled there in Japan and lived quietly and happily ever after. But Rizal remembered that he had a mission, and his life purpose is not to stay in Japan. He needs to help the Filipino people get alleviated from their miserable condition in the hands of the Spaniards. He wants to be the liberator of the Filipino people. He wants to help the Filipino people have a better life. And how can he do that when he is in Japan? He needs to go to Europe. So Rizal left Japan, and also Osei-san. That must have broken the heart of Osei-san. In 1897, the year after Rizal's death, Osei-san married a British chemistry teacher named Alfred Carlton. So you see, Osei-san waited until Rizal died before she looked for somebody else. As long as Rizal was alive, she must be keeping herself for Rizal, waiting patiently for his probable return, but that never happened. So it's time to move on. In 1897, she married another man, and they had one child named Yuriko. An interesting trivia is that Osei-san kept a collection of Philippine stamps with Rizal's portrait from 1900s until her death in the 1940s. And she would show the stamp collection to her grandchildren, telling them that, you know, once upon a time, I was the girlfriend of this man, the national hero of the Philippines. Very interesting, isn't it? Rizal must have really left a big imprint in her heart. After staying in Japan, Rizal went to the United States. He didn't have any documented girlfriend there. And then after the US, he went to England. And when he was in England doing the annotaciones, he had a relationship with Gertrude Becket, and we call her partner in crime. This is how she looked like. This is a photograph of Gertrude. We give Gertrude the nickname partner in crime. We will find out later why. So Rizal was in London annotating the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, the history book. Rizal's workplace was the London Library or the British Museum, which was very near his boarding house. And guess who was his landlord? Charles Becket, the father of Gertrude. And Rizal had this description of Gertrude. He said that she's a curvy lady with cheerful blue eyes, brown hair, rosy cheeks, and thin lips. And many sources say that among all the women of Rizal, Gertrude was the most beautiful of them all. They had terms of endearment for one another. Rizal would call Gertrude Getty, and she would call Rizal Petty. It's like this: "Hi Getty, how are you today?" "I'm fine, Petty. How about you?" And aside from doing the annotaciones, Rizal also did some sculptures and paintings while he was in London. And Getty would be his assistant. Probably she would give him merienda. And we know that she also posed as a model for Rizal's sculptures. Here's a sample of the thing they did together: the triumph of science over death. Do you see this sculpture on the right? This is just around 1 to 2 feet tall. And Rizal sculpted this with Gertrude posing nude in front of him. Today, we can see this sculpture in the National Museum. Now, during the American period, the Americans made a life-size version of this small statue in Alabang. So today, you can see this statue at the facade of the Landmark Mall in Alabang. That is the work of art of Rizal and Getty that the Americans converted into a life-size statue. The statue is about a woman stepping on a skull. The woman represents science and the skull represents death. And Rizal, being a doctor, is saying here that time has come that human beings are now superior over death because of science and technology. So that's the meaning behind this statue. Now, Rizal didn't stay long in England. When he has finished doing the annotaciones, he left England and went to France. And he also left Gertrude Becket all by her lonesome. In France, Rizal met Nelly Boed, and we call her wife material. She's one of the women that Rizal almost married because he has found something that is wife material in her. This is how she looked like. This is a photograph. So this is how the real Nelly looked like. Nelly was half Filipino, half British. Her mother was Filipina, her father was British, but she considered herself Filipina. So that must be something that made Rizal admire her so much. Despite having foreign blood, she still considers herself very Filipina. And they come from a very rich family. The Boeds were businessmen selling their goods in the Philippines. They had a house in Paris. They had a house in Biarritz, a resort city in France, just like Boracay. And this is the time also that Rizal and Leonor had broken up, because Leonor had already married somebody else. And so Rizal was looking for love. And when he found Nelly, he must have said to himself, this is the girl that I really want to marry. Nelly had a sister, and Rizal, together with Antonio Luna, would often have group dates with the Boed sisters. The Lunas were family friends with the Boeds. Juan Luna, Antonio Luna, Rizal, and the in-laws of Juan Luna were one big barkada during that time. Now, Antonio Luna was also in love with Nelly. So Rizal had a karibal. But Nelly was more interested in Rizal. One day, in a drinking party, Antonio Luna was very, very drunk and he said very bad words about Nelly. And Rizal, being a gentleman, confronted Luna. He said, "You should take away what you have just said." But Luna, because he was drunk, became even angrier and challenged Rizal to a duel. A duel is like a fight to the death. The end of the duel is the death of one of the fighters. So it could be a sword fight or shooting one another with pistols. Luna said, "Let's meet at this time, at this day, at this place, and then whoever wins the duel will be the one who will get Nelly." But with the help of their friends, the quarrel was fixed and the duel was cancelled. When Luna was no longer drunk, Rizal's friends talked to him and told him that, "Don't you know that you challenged Rizal to a duel when you were drunk? Do you know that you said this and you said that while you were drunk?" And then Antonio, realizing that he was wrong, canceled the duel. And so that's a good thing, because imagine if one of them died, then our Philippine history or the revolution part of our history would have a different story. Now, Rizal and Nelly didn't get married for the following reasons. Rizal refused to be converted to the Protestant faith. Nelly was Protestant. Another reason is that Nelly's mother didn't want Rizal because he wasn't earning big time. Remember, they are a mega rich family, and Rizal was a newly graduated doctor and he's not even practicing medicine. He's just writing novels, writing history books, and he's not earning big money. So Nelly's mother didn't like Rizal, but they parted as good friends when Rizal left Europe. No big heartache for Rizal and Nelly. Number 8 on our list is Suzanne Jacobi, and we call her the Fling. Suzanne is from Belgium. We all know that Rizal published his second novel while he was in Belgium, and it was in Belgium that he met Suzanne Jacobi in his boarding house. So that's a pattern, Rizal seems to fall in love with his landladies. Suzanne called Rizal little bad boy. Why? Probably they do bad things together. So when Rizal left Brussels, Belgium, Suzanne begged Rizal to come back to her. And in her letter, she addressed Rizal, "Hey, little bad boy, come back to me." We don't know anything much about Suzanne Jacobi aside from these facts. Last on our list is Josephine Bracken. This is her photograph. So this is how the real Josephine Bracken looked like. In the 1800s, this is the fashion. They wore large clothes and they also had large hair. Very thick and long hair. And we call her Rizal's last love. Josephine was Irish. Her parents were from Ireland. Her father was a soldier in the British Army and she was born in Hong Kong. Her mother died, and upon the death of her mother, the father couldn't take care anymore of Josephine, so he had Josephine adopted by a family, the family of George Topher, an American engineer working in the Hong Kong fire station. Now later on, Mr. Topher became blind, and so he needed an eye doctor. Josephine would look for a Dr. Jose Rizal, who was previously based in Hong Kong. Rizal was a famous eye doctor holding clinic in Hong Kong, but she couldn't find him. She got information that this Dr. Rizal was back in the Philippines, so Josephine and Mr. Topher went to Manila, found out that Rizal was not in Manila but in Dapitan. So Josephine and Mr. Topher went to Dapitan to seek eye treatment. And it was love at first sight. Rizal fell in love with Josephine Bracken. Remember that Rizal was single and ready to mingle. Leonor Rivera just died 2 years earlier. And Dapitan was a very lonely place. And seeing Josephine Bracken, that must have lightened up Rizal's life. But it was like a Romeo and Juliet love affair. Rizal's family didn't like Josephine. They thought that Josephine was a spy sent by the Spanish friars to check on Rizal in his exile in Dapitan. So they moved heaven and earth just to prevent Rizal from falling in love with Josephine, who was several years younger than Rizal. Rizal asked Josephine to marry him, but she was not yet ready. Why? Because she was still taking care of the blind Mr. Topher. Rizal failed to cure Mr. Topher's blindness, so he was very angry when he left Dapitan. He spent a lot just to see Rizal and he didn't get the healing that he was expecting, so he went back to Hong Kong. Josephine accompanied him to Manila, put him in a ship going back to Hong Kong, and after doing that, she returned to Dapitan and wanted to get married to Rizal. Upon her return to Dapitan, Rizal tried to arrange their marriage with the parish priest there in Dapitan named Father Antonio Obac. But Father Obac would not wed Rizal and Josephine unless Rizal retracted. Retraction means Rizal would make a public document stating that all his writings, the noli, the fili, and everything he said about the Spanish authorities and the Catholic Church were just a big joke, or he was sorry for writing them. Rizal wouldn't do that. And so Father Obac would not give the wedding that Rizal was requesting. Nonetheless, Rizal and Josephine Bracken still continued to live as husband and wife, but they were unmarried. In our time, it's called live-in. And that was big news during that time. That was a big controversy at that time for man and woman to live together as husband and wife without the sacrament of marriage. And that infuriated Rizal's parents and sisters. They hated Josephine even more. Now, Josephine and Rizal had a baby, but the baby died while still in the tummy of Josephine. Many say that the baby died because Josephine might have been shocked or frightened. Some neighbors in Dapitan said that there was a big fight, a big quarrel between Josephine and Jose just before Josephine gave birth to the stillborn child. In Rizal's writings, Josephine was mentioned in Mi Ultimo Adios. Rizal called her my unhappy wife. Why did Rizal call her unhappy? Maybe because they didn't get married. He wasn't able to give the wedding that Josephine was hoping for. And maybe because Rizal's family didn't like her. So they had a very sorrowful relationship. And she was the last woman in Rizal's life. As a summary, here again is the list of Rizal's women. We start with Julia, the first crush, but they had no formal relationship. Number 1 to 9 are the ones that really became Rizal's girlfriends. Segunda Katigbak, first love. Leonor Valenzuela, secret love. Leonor Rivera, true love. Consuelo Ortega, the crush ng bayan. Osei San, the tour guide. Gertrude Becket, the partner in crime. Nelly Boed, the wife material. Suzanne Jacobi, the fling. And Josephine Bracken, Rizal's last love. Now, what are the life lessons that we can extract from these love stories? There can be many, but I have just enumerated 3. Number 1, don't judge a book by its cover. Rizal had no trouble getting girls fall in love with him, even though he's short and he's seemingly physically unattractive. So it's not really the physical appearance that matters, but the character. Number 2, loyalty. Remember that Rizal remained loyal to Leonor Rivera. He didn't get any girlfriend until they broke up. One time in their relationship, Rizal had been a two-timer, but since that episode with the 2 Leonors, he just had one girlfriend at a time. And those many relationships happened after the breakup with Leonor. When he was abroad, he was able to check himself in time before things get out of control. So remember, when you are in a relationship, especially when you are already married, you should be faithful. Being a two-timer causes broken hearts and broken lives. And number 3, sacrifice. Rizal was willing to give up romantic relationships for the sake of principles. One classic case was his breakup with Osei San. Rizal gave up that relationship because he knew he had a bigger thing to pursue. He had a bigger mission to fulfill. And so he broke up with Osei San. Are you willing to give up romantic relationships if it gets in the way of a noble cause like academics or something else? Think about that. And so in this episode, we have seen the love stories of our national hero, Jose Rizal. So we now come here to the end of this episode. I hope you learned many things. Thank you very much for watching. This is Sir Jet saying goodbye and thank you.